Big news in the college football landscape. That's what we're going to discuss today on the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr, joined by senior editor at Blue White Illustrated, Nate Bauer. Nate, good morning. And first off, I just want to get your feelings on the matter of how you reacted to the news yesterday that Texas and Oklahoma are defecting from the Big 12, presumably right now to go to the SEC. And then I want to get your impact, what you think of what the impact is on Penn State in the long term in the grand picture of these things. But first, just your reaction to what you thought yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, it's, obviously there had been some conversation through the weekend, right? Starting, I think, on Thursday last week. And so it was a build up to that point last week, or I guess yesterday, where the official announcement was made, right? Where the schools themselves announced that was their intention. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, having been through some of the conference realignment stuff of a decade ago at this point, right. With Nebraska and Missouri and some of those different pieces that shook themselves out, nothing truly surprises me anymore in college football. I mean, I think that there's, and we could talk about this later, but there's this broad conversation that was had, again, a decade ago, maybe even 15 years ago, about what college football was going to become. And what college football was going to become, bottom line, was 4 16-team conferences.
Right.
The input, the conversation, like all of those different things, if you kind of polled guys who knew and who understood the way that things were going, that was what they all pointed to. But it was just a matter of it materializing. And so at some point, the first domino has to fall. And obviously, Oklahoma, Texas together in one weekend in July, having it come to fruition that they're leaving for the SEC, leaving the Big 12 for the SEC, the two marquee programs of the Big 12 leaving for the SEC. Yeah, that's huge. But there's the backside of it, which is, okay, this was going to happen at some point. Maybe not that move specifically, but pieces were going to start to shift. And with NIL, with everything else that's going on in college athletics, it's okay. The future is here. It's happening.
How do you think that the NIL figures into Texas and Oklahoma wanting to go to the SEC in particular? How do you think that affects the big picture when it comes to this particular move?
It's all about money, right?
Right. Yeah.
It is. It's about rights deals, the media rights deals that these programs want to be a part of in the conferences that they belong to, and even in the Power 5 conferences, it's the haves and the have-nots. It's, if you look at what that money can do for an athletic department, who again are all trying to operate under some semblance of a higher education model, right? Like
that's quickly vanishing in a lot of places. That's the facade is quickly vanishing.
Well, they're trying to thread the needle here, but you're talking about millions and millions of dollars, and in a budget like Penn State's, where it's 120 million, 130 million in revenues versus 118 in expenses. Well, the difference between that $35 million that they're getting, I'm ballparking here, but the difference between 35 million in revenues from the Big Ten, their share of the Big Ten revenues, versus 25 million or 20 million or 15 million is massive. It's huge. It makes all the difference in the world in these departments being able to operate the way that they want to. And so certainly for Oklahoma and Texas, that's a big part of it. With the second component, hey, are you going to be competitive in the recruiting space? And if you're going to be competitive in the recruiting space, you better have something to offer from an NIL perspective.
Yeah.
the SEC and the inclusion in the SEC would seem to do that for those programs where the relevancy of the Big 12 might not, where those opportunities might not exist. So yeah, I mean, it's
one part about that, because you're right in that aspect, and this is where I want to bring it back to Penn State. How do you think Penn State and the Big Ten are positioned as much more scholastically oriented than the SEC? Let's drop the facade here. The SEC is not as concerned with their appearance as academic institutions as some of the core Big Ten schools are, including Michigan and Penn State. Now, Ohio State is much more SEC oriented, but they are still a part of that organization that has been touting the academic and threading that needle you're talking about. When it comes to the NIL stuff, how is Penn State positioned right now in comparison to not the SEC in general, but just going forward? How are they positioned going forward in this new landscape?
I don't think well, honestly.
Oh boy.
It's out there. Look, Penn State's plan to have its first foot be about the educational component of this, to make it about creating entrepreneurial opportunities, and it's what's the old saying? Give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach him how to fish. Right.
Yep.
And so that's the concept. That is what Penn State as an institution is trying to do here, with its athletes, with its student athletes. Okay, that's different, and that gives you a space that separates you a little bit from the rest of the conversation and distinguishes you. But I don't know how competitive it's going to be when the dollars actually start to come in, when the dollars and cents come in, right? And so there's that component, and then they're also trying to leverage, the huge alumni base, which is a differentiating factor and is something that will provide opportunities. But end of the day, are you actually competitive from a numbers standpoint with what the student athletes or the athletes at these other institutions are making? And we're talking about your peers, right? Not just other Big Ten schools, but if Penn State football wants to be on the level of Georgia, Alabama,
right.
in that national conversation, Notre Dame, right? That is what is going to be interesting to see, because right now I don't think the story is written yet. I don't think it's actually happening yet. I think that it's starting to happen at some of these other places. I have not seen it so far at Penn State, and so that's what I'm watching, and I'm kind of reserving judgment until some of that actually comes in. But at the moment, it's a little bit of a precarious position to be in until you actually see what the results are.
Yeah. So this to me, and back to my original question, obviously for some people, this is going to be a review of history. I did not live through a lot of this stuff. So the conference realignments have been happening since television got involved in the 80s. And this has been a progress, like you talked about, since the beginning, that has been heading towards these super conferences. So what Texas and Oklahoma said, the shifting landscape of college football, to me, is a bunch of BS. This is something that they've wanted to do for a long time. This is something that has been coming for a while. So the NIL stuff is just an excuse to do what you already wanted to do. I do think it has ramifications on places like Penn State and places that had stability until the stability was upset. But of course, Penn State was the first one to upset it when they went to the Big Ten back in 1990. So this has been a progress that's been happening for 30 years. And again, part of some of the research I was doing to, become educated on this stuff is the SEC has wanted Texas this whole time. They wanted Texas since the very beginning of expansion, and it just took them 30 years to get there. But finally, well, I guess 35, if they play out the media rights in the Big 12, it'll be 35 years, but they finally got their guy. this is my biggest thing about the conversation here is we've had conference alignments, the WAC, the Southwestern Conference, the Big East. They've all, there's been rise and fall of certain conferences. But when the landscape is changed by Texas and Oklahoma, two schools moving at the same time, this is very much an arms race, and the Big Ten has to find a way to keep track. And I went down through and tried to kind of, if we're playing tennis here and the return volley from Penn State is South Carolina and Arkansas, so the Big Ten gets Nebraska, Maryland, Rutgers. Well, now they've countered with Texas A&M and Missouri. So it's been even so far, and I think we can see that the Big Ten and the SEC are the two conferences that are separating themselves from the Pac and the Pac-12. Mm-hmm. Now it's Texas and Oklahoma. What is left for the Big Ten to absorb? Because right now they are at a disadvantage from the actual perception of the organizations, let alone, the SEC already dominates in a lot of ways. They're pulling ahead now. So in terms of the perception of the quality of these schools from an athletic standpoint, and primarily football, but also in basketball, what's left on the landscape for Penn State to pick, or for the Big Ten to pick up to add to their portfolio?
Yeah, and certainly if you look at it as these things are off the table, these schools are off the table, they're already committed to other conferences, then it would seem like there's not much left. But if this exercise has taught us or should teach us anything, it's that nothing's off limits. Nothing is off limits.
So what's the next conference to fall? So that's I guess the next question is, what's the next conference to fall? Because the Big 12 is crumbling at this point, and what's left is you're gonna pick over the remains of what's left. Oklahoma State, like if we're taking a look at the athletic program and not necessarily the media rights and the footprint, because those are different. So you can get Kansas, and then you get the state of Kansas. That's great, but is Kansas a program that's going to lift your profile overall? The preferences are obviously Texas and Oklahoma, but as far as quality of programs, what's left out there? And do you then go to, say, the Pac-12 and go, okay, if everything's on the table, the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, they have an alignment from an academic viewpoint. Do they team up against the SEC? And what's the weird future there?
Yeah, but why is the SEC off the table?
Why You're going to poach teams from the SEC?
Why is Texas A&M as the disgruntled Texas university who has the big donor pockets and might think to themselves, well, we've been disrespected. We don't really like the way that this is going. We can become the sole Texas Big Ten team, this outlier, this right? Like, I mean, I guess I'm getting tingles. You just blew my mind. I hadn't even thought about it that way. Yeah, like I am. That is outside the box thinking. That's absolutely right. But I think that if the considerations are not that everything is on the table, then you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
From any of these universities, any of these conferences, right? All of it is, all right, the rules have changed in every way. And as a result of that, it's not just that they've changed, it's that they don't matter. Right? Like, yeah, right. There's contracts and there's legal things, right? But that's why you pay lawyers. They figure that stuff out. But what do you want to do? Do you want to be part of something that is moving forward, getting better and getting bigger, and is going to shape the conversation of what college football and what college athletics is in the future? Or do you want to get left behind? Because those are the two options. And I said this on Blue White Illustrated's message board a couple of days ago. That thinking is holding especially true in this situation, where if you are standing still right now as a conference or as a university and athletic department, you are going to blink and you're going to look up and it's going to be out of your grasp. You're going to have fewer options. You're going to have fewer avenues to go down. So you better be coming at this with the approach of, hey, what is the best place for us now and in the future. Where is this going? And I think that everybody can see that where it's going is huge money, bigger conferences. What makes the splash? What moves the needle?
Yeah. So, and by the way, the money on the individual school level, look, and the competition, because the most fascinating thing to me is that this is Texas and Oklahoma, because Oklahoma has had its own path into the college football playoff over the last 5 years. They've basically, as long as they win their conference, and they have most times, they get in. So you've got an easy path in from that side. Texas has been this quasi-independent entity in the Big 12 that has led everyone around by the nose with the Longhorn Network. So they have both proven that despite the fact that you can have your cake and eat it too, if you're not in the pond with the big fish, you're going to eventually, your puddle's going to dry up. And you're not going to be Notre Dame. You're not going to have the NBC national deal. So you need to find a new home. And I find it interesting. Is this what Texas wanted the whole time? Because they basically sunk the Big 12 with not being fully in on the Big 12 media rights and having their own way with the Longhorn Network. They did not allow the Big 12 to grow. They did not allow that conference to be one that absorbs other places. They're getting absorbed now, and Texas, I think, is largely to blame for that, but they get to get off scot-free by being an average sports program that has been selfish with the money over time, and then they bolt to the SEC because they're Texas. It just goes to prove that you don't have to be good at this in managing these things to win. You just have to have the right color scheme that everyone likes over time.
I think that the Big 12 is going to do its hardest to make sure that this isn't easy for Texas.
They should.
Right?
They absolutely
I mean,
should.
It is a grudge situation at this point. Attempting to make sure that whatever, obviously Texas has its own rights and there are things that it can do. There are things obviously it wants to do, but this notion of maybe an early exit where these teams start competition in 2023. I think the Big 12 made it very, very plain yesterday. That's not going to happen. Not if they have anything to do with it. And obviously they do. So yeah, it's again, there are lots of options, lots of different things out there, and every university and every conference right now needs to be considering not just what they are right now, but what they want to become. Where is this going? And you better have some foresight and some vision that isn't necessarily constrained by tradition, by all of the things that got you to this point in the first place.
Yeah. And speaking, by the way, of foresight, the 2021 Penn State football preview issue is here. 166-page full-color magazine. Look at it right here. I have one here. Just for it's chock
pretty.
Right? You guys
Pretty.
did a great job. This is an awesome magazine. It's a comprehensive guide to the Nittany Lions' upcoming season, packed with exclusive content, including interviews, features, opinions, and analysis. Learn more at bluewhiteonline.com or by calling 800-421-7751. That's bluewhiteonline.com or 800-421-7751. I was looking over the predictions in here that the staff put together, and almost everybody is in lockstep, Nate. Nobody went out on the edge and was like, you were the most edgy one by predicting how many wins?
I predicted a 10-2 season.
10-2.
Yeah, and I'm not a edgy guy. I don't do bullish or bearish. I typically find some middle ground, but what can I say? I think they're going to be pretty good this year.
Yeah, and quickly, just one quick note. Auburn is entirely overrated in everyone's eyes. Everyone seems to think Auburn is great, and here's the thing. They weren't great before. That's why they got rid of their coach. So here we are.
You said it for me. I spent a quick aside. I spent a weekend surrounded by some big SEC people a couple of weekends ago, and they hammered home. They were like, Auburn's terrible. Auburn's awful, and they got to go north to Penn State. Penn State's gonna kill them. I was like, okay, all right.
to get back to our conversation, Auburn's a blue blood in the SEC, and they're an afterthought. So Texas and Oklahoma, buckle up. Like, you're not going to run the show. So that comes down to another thing that I think is interesting for the Big Ten, and this leads back to Penn State. Do you want to add really good teams, or do you want to add markets so that your marquee teams can be seen by more people? So Penn State, Michigan, and they got to get their act together from a sports standpoint, or else it doesn't matter. And then Ohio State, obviously the leader in the Big Ten. Do you want those teams to have a Kansas? Do you want them to have let's go high end and say in the Big 12 TCU? Or what are you looking for in your conference realignment? What would you be looking for? You might have tipped your hand earlier. What would you be looking for in a conference realignment from a Penn State perspective of what's the best to add for the Nittany Lions in the long run?
Money.
You got me. I thought I had a good question, and you had that's the right answer.
Add money. Add money. Where does it come from? I don't know. I don't get paid for that.
Yeah.
Somebody does. And the analytics people, the people who do the market research and things that are well beyond my pay grade, they know what moves the needle. It's actually kind of funny because you just what you said about winning doesn't matter. It doesn't, because if you're winning a conference that isn't generating money for you, you might be winning right now, but you're not going to be in the future. And the whole deal is that, that easy pathway to the playoff, that's not going to matter either, because when there's 12 teams in the playoff, you're going to get spanked. You're going to get spanked because you're not competing at that level on a national stage. So money, add money to your conference. And if you can't add money, then don't do it. Don't add dead weight, but go out, see what's out there. No limits to what the possibilities are, right? Duke, UNC, are they off the table for the Big Ten? Obviously there's a lot of different things from a legal standpoint, but this isn't the SEC just made a move, the Big Ten has to make one tomorrow. This is a long game. This is a long game. Get into it. Figure out what the scenario is and make your play.
Yeah, so I have a lot of opinions on what you just opened up there, talking about money being the most important thing and not competition, but we'll save that for a different show. We got to get going here on the BWI Daily Edition. Nate Bauer is my host today on the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. Nate, thank you for coming and looking at the big picture with me. I enjoy looking at things from this perspective and not just from the microscope that we typically cover on a day-to-day basis. This is the stuff, the tectonic plates that move around you that maybe sometimes you don't even feel. It's important to look at this stuff as well. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. I move at a glacial pace myself, so it's fitting.
There's the tortoise and then the hare, and then there's Nate.
There you go.
Make sure you subscribe to the BWI Daily Edition on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be doing more live shows. We'll be doing more individual special event shows and things like that. You don't want to miss any of it. So YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, hit subscribe, notification, review. You've heard 1,000 podcasts like this. You know the drill. So if you want to support this and you want to hear more of stuff like this from me and from Nate and from Ryan and Greg and everybody at Blue White Illustrated, hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.